Hello and welcome to week 3 in social psychology. And what we are going to be looking at in this particular week, the two chapters are chapter 4, which is conducting psychological research in the real world, and chapter 5, social neuroscience. That sounds really interesting, doesn't it? So let's take a look at chapter 4 first. We have a kind of a research methods focus. We've talked about statistical thinking and scientific thinking. Now we're looking at methodology. And I can't help but recognize a similarity between what is talked about in social psychology and what we also talk about in my anthropology class. And that in anthropology, historically, they called it armchair anthropology. Scientists would sit in their armchairs on their porches or in their dens smoking a pipe, and they would read stories of people that live afar and develop theories about that particular society. Now, as time went on, what we started to see is the impact of individual social norms and mores and whatnot influencing the way people interpret these stories. And anthropologists took it upon themselves that probably the better way to do this is to actually go and live among individuals or groups that they want to study. Social psychology approaches this the same way. They do experiments, they do surveys, they do all of those things that you've learned about in every single psychology class, but there's a lot more embedded stuff. Because social psychology looks at psychology as it's in context of a society or a group, it needs that first-hand type of data gathering. A little confused there in how to actually put it across. But if you're going to understand a family, you can send a survey. But if you're going to really understand a family, you might want to spend some time with that family and understand all the different things. There's still issues that come up with that research methodology in terms of how truthful, how observant, and even our own cultural norms and mores coming into the play there, but certainly better for data gathering. Now, I spend a little time in terms of the dialogue in this chapter talking about online behavior. Now, many of you might know, or some of you certainly don't know, that my research for my dissertation had to do with the social environment that is created within an online class. And there are a number of factors about that: the perceived presence of the instructor, the perceived presence of other people in the classroom, the willingness to share personal information, perceptions of your own writing skills. Each one of these plays into the creation of the social milieu that we call an online class. And I took it upon myself to determine whether or not those factors play into how successful a person is in that class. Now, some of the things that I talk about and some of the things that I research in the process of that, I sort of mention in the course, but going through looking at the online world as an example where you could apply the research methods of social psychology. And the topics that I bring up include technology itself, a concept called transactional distance, which every time you insert a piece of technology, it increases the perceived distance from that person. So there's a little bit of anonymity that exists within social networks that are facilitated on a computer. As you could probably imagine, individuals' behavior on an online forum may not reflect the same behavior that they have when they're face-to-face with those people. Whenever technology is used, we call that the message that you're creating is mediated through that technology. There are norms and values and expectations associated with technology and different platforms. There's an issue of the quality. There's an issue of inequality, not only in terms of the digital divide, meaning some people have access to the internet and some don't, but some are more skilled at using the internet and have more knowledge about the internet, use it better, and there's actually a knowledge base about how to use this very powerful tool that is inequitably distributed. Issues of reading, writing, privacy of information that is on the front of social issues right now, engagement, and even in the world of addiction, people becoming addicted to social media and using their computers. This chapter has a discussion and a quiz. In the discussion, I want you to talk about your personal experiences with technology. We just went through the pandemic where everybody had to learn online. You use social media, use email, texting, those kinds of things. How does that relate to your own experience of those norms and expectations, the transactional distance? You see people, we don't want to point anybody out about, bad players in the world of social media. What has been your own personal experience? What have you taken on as a way of creating your identity in the online world? And then in the quiz, a couple questions. One is going back to the that anthropology perspective, asking why is it better to do stuff in the real world instead of armchair and talking about stories, kind of get that. And then I want you to look at the social media platform of your choice, be it Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Look up the actual norms, the rules related to posting on those social media platforms, and describe those, and describe maybe, have you seen violations of that? As what does it mean for a company to regulate the communication in an online forum and stuff? Kind of get into the meat of this whole issue about what is the responsibility of companies to regulate the factual basis of their social media platforms. Just getting right into that discussion. We then switch into social neuroscience. And what this kind of basically is, in my intro to psych class, I talk about perceptual skills that are ingrained into our mind that actually place people in categories. So let's say we're going to talk about race. Now, we discriminate between people of different colored skin, different shape of their eyes, different texture of their hair, by natural neurological process. We organize things into categories: plants, animals, different kinds of people. That's what we do. Edible something, non-edible something. These are all built into the neurology. Now, because we have that built-in ability to discriminate, the soft term discriminate, I can tell one stimulus from another. I can tell a person who's black from a person who's white. That is integrated into the nervous system. That is not a subject of socialization. The other kind of discrimination, making generalizations about individuals based on those single factors that we use to discriminate people in groups, that kind of discrimination is what we learn in society, to whatever degree that we've learned it or not learned it. But social psychology recognizes the actual neurological factors that are involved in this that create an opportunity for us to consciously be aware of the way in which we perceive things around us and categorize things, including people, so that we can understand our own prejudices and our own discriminations and our own ways in which we react to other kinds of people in the world that are different from us. It also talks about social stress. Now, in addition to that neurological piece, we have society, the context. It's even, whether it's your family, your snowmobile group, your knitting class, whatever, that group, when we look at it sociologically, has a culture, norms, values, and expectations, and a sort of social control system or policing if you go outside of that. So if, for example, in your knitting group, using very poor and vulgar language is frowned upon, it's not expected to be happening in that knitting group, regardless of how your knitting project turned out. You're not supposed to drop the F-bomb. What will happen if you did? Kind of thinking about, there's a social control mechanism there. And just going on that kind of light example, let's say you're a kind of person who grew up where the F word was kind of didn't have the intensity that it might have for other people. You may say, like, pass the effing salt or something like that at the dinner table, and nobody's really worked up about that. But then you join a knitting group that says, nope, you can't say that word. What you may experience is what we would call, in this case, a pretty minor example of social stress. This is the person I am, but when I'm in this context, I have to act in a way that is in line with the expectations of that group. Now, we could take that example and scale it wherever we go. How do we act when we get a new job? How do we act when we're in church? How do we act when we're at an interview? How do we act when we're at a concert? And all those things. Or let's say I'm at a concert. How do I act? Because there might be people from my work that see me at the concert. All of these things. When we take into consideration the thoughts and opinions of others in our groups, we can experience what we would call social stress. Now, once we take stress and introduce it into the biological system of our bodies, we're activating the peripheral nervous system, we're activating the quote-unquote fight, flight, or fawn. That's actually the new, the flight, get away, fight, battle it, flight, get away, and fawn is kind of like warming up to make sure that you're not in danger with that individual and kind of talking about it or whatever, to fawn things over. And this creates some biology in us in terms of the sympathetic nervous system activating. Our heart rate's higher, we're sweating, we're nervous, we have dry mouth, and all those things when we're in these situations. And these situations they're contrived stimuli. They're not a real threat, like a deadly threat, like a tiger jumps at you or something like that. These are contrived from the social area. So this chapter is really looking at the power of social situations to enact systems within our body that were used to protect our lives, even though those situations are not life-threatening. That's probably a good way of saying it. So when we look at those particular things, we see some problems that can come up with that in terms of people's reactions in social situations and reactions when they're offset by a comment or something like that. There's skill sets to go along with that. Okay, other aspects of this, in that categorizing, I'm just going through my notes here, categorizing things and taking cognitive shortcuts, we talk about that. Simulations that we might experience and the actual perspective taking that we can get into with other people, you're going to read about that. And then I actually put my video in there about crisis fatigue. And crisis fatigue is a concept that certainly has come out because of the pandemic, but it had existed for a long time, particularly in wartime or times of recession or depression. And that is when a crisis lasts a long time. What does that do? When, here we are in the pandemic where there was, existential stress. Am I going to get sick and die? Then there's pseudo-existential, am I going to lose my job? I have no money, the kind of stresses that would come from being able to actually survive economically, worried about other people, worried about, is it ever going to get back to normal? And instantaneous trauma itself, research supports that about 2/3 of people will have resilience to be able to say, okay, this is a temporary thing, I'm just going to make it through. About 1/3 will struggle with that in terms of any population. However, when something persists, it doesn't simply go away. It's not like an event, it's horrid examples, but if you look at 9/11, the stress that went out from 9/11 was certainly created some chronic stress in people, certainly, but about 2/3 of the nation, that event happened, they pulled up their bootstraps and carried on. And of course, there was an impact, and I'm not minimizing any of that. But here we have the pandemic where people continue to die. Up to 400, maybe 500 people a day in the United States still die from COVID. And so this kind of persistent presence and fear, even anticipatory fear about what if it gets bad again and we have to go into masks, take all these classes, put them online, I might lose my job again, and all these things. What's the new normal? Are we going to have to be dealing with this all the time, like we deal with the presence of the flu all the time? All those things play a really, really deep part in our biological, neurological reactions to these things. Okay, there are two discussions for this chapter. The first discussion, actually, I didn't really talk about it a lot here, read about it. Are these cognitive shortcuts that we take. Some of them involve, kind of errors that we make because we're expecting certain things to be going on, or that's what we're aware of. Our heuristics, let's say, availability heuristics is an error that we make when we judge how we understand the world just by what's right in front of us, and we don't take into consideration things that we don't see every day. We also have biases, and we have biases that when we're looking at information, we'll tend to focus on information that confirms our existing biases rather than looking for things that don't confirm. And we might experience, particularly with the help of all those algorithms that we see working in search engines like Google, if I'm looking up a particular topic and I'm looking to see, what are both sides of this, and I'm gravitating to the side that kind of resonates with me, then the algorithm within Google will actually start, that must be what I'm looking for, and it starts feeding me more of that. So pretty soon I can develop a perception that, this is what everybody thinks, and it would be absurd for there to be another story. So these things are really, really relevant in terms of how this is hardwired in our brain, the neuroscience of this, and how we take those kinds of shortcuts. So the first discussion is to explore some of those that you've experienced in your own life. Errors in judgment, errors in bias, availability heuristics, those kind of things. Read up about those and discuss some of those. Now, in the course book, but also in the textbook, discusses about how do we deal with these social stresses? How do we contemplate making our way through that? How do we become resilient? And so far, aside from, they're genetically blessed, individuals who are resilient engage in thought processes that are more positive affirmations, I can do this sort of attitudes, but they also address the biology. Stress from these social sources creates energy in the body that can be dispelled through healthy ways, like exercising, eating well, and getting lots of sleep. In addition, individuals who persist through these reach out to other people. In fact, that was the real issue with the pandemic. When we are in a stressful situation, we tend to reach out and bring our family, bring our close people close, and you're my support. That got interrupted with the pandemic because of social distancing and all the things that go along with that. So even for individuals who are resilient, one of their best tools, reaching out to family and friends for support, got interrupted. So even they didn't have that tool. They had to, I have to survive this on my own. And for many people, that was really a challenge. But reaching out, taking care of your body, working on positive thinking, focus, all these things. I'm asking you in the discussion to say, what is your plan? You're here, I'm going to assume you're healthy, you're doing well, you're, at least good enough that you're going to class. And what do? Do you take care? Do you do things when you're under stress? Do you do things healthy, such as taking care of your body, working on your own inner dialogue, and also exercising and reaching out to other people? What is your plan? What is your plan when stress comes along? So I'm interested in having those discussions with you. So just 2 discussions for that chapter. So you have 3 discussions and a quiz for this week. It's going to be like that. This is a big topic. So that is the assignments for this week. I look forward to all 3 of those discussions. I think they're all really rich and interesting. And so I will see you in those discussions. Have a great week here on week 3, and I will talk to you folks later.